A janitor thinks he can fix this? Victoria Sterling's voice cut through the boardroom like a whip. Her words weren't just spoken, they were weaponized, dripping with disdain as they hung in the air. She stood near the head of the long marble conference table, 20 pairs of eyes shifting between her and the man frozen in the doorway. Jamal Washington hadn't expected to be standing here. He had simply been doing his job, his cart stacked with cleaning supplies, black trash bags crinkling in his hands, when the door had swung open and Victoria's sharp gaze had landed on him like a laser. Her diamond bracelet caught the fluorescent lights as she raised her hand dramatically, pressing it against her nose. "God, you even smell like motor oil," she added, her voice pitched loud enough for every executive to hear. Laughter, polite but cruel, rippled through the room. Jamal's jaw tightened. He said nothing, though his silence spoke volumes. His dark eyes scanned the table where America's so-called brightest minds sat, Ivy League graduates in $1,000 suits, each watching him as if he had wandered into a world where he didn't belong. To them, he was nothing more than furniture with a pulse. Victoria pushed back her chair and rose to her full height. Her red Louis Vuitton heels clicked against the marble floor with slow, deliberate rhythm, each step punctuating her authority. When she stopped, she was so close that Jamal could smell her perfume, a sharp, expensive blend, laced with something colder, contempt. She tilted her chin upward, looking down at him as if he were an insect on display. "Here's a deal, maintenance boy," she said, her words sweetened with poison. "Fix this $2 million engine, the same engine MIT engineers couldn't repair, and I'll marry you right here, today." Gasps echoed around the room, followed by stifled chuckles. She leaned even closer, snapping her fingers inches from his face like a queen dismissing a servant. "And when you fail, and trust me, security will escort you out permanently." The silence that followed was deafening. On the polished conference table sat the broken machine at the heart of Tech Vanguard's crisis, a revolutionary AI-guided engine that had already consumed 3 years of research and swallowed tens of millions of dollars. It should have been humming with power, proof of the company's dominance in the autonomous delivery industry. Instead, it sat dormant, mocking the very people who had designed it. Jamal looked at it, then back at Victoria. His callous hands tightened around the trash bags, the plastic crinkling loudly in the oppressive silence. To the executives, the situation was theater, a ruthless CEO staging another humiliation, a bored audience waiting for the punchline. To Jamal, it was something else entirely. For 3 years, he had been invisible in these halls. He knew every gleam of the marble floor, every whisper of the ventilation system, every corner where executives passed him by without a glance. His badge might have said technical consultant, but his reality was trash bags, mops, and the weight of silent humiliation. The room held its collective breath, the tension thick enough to choke on. Jamal's pride wavered, but he refused to look away. Victoria, savoring the drama, turned back to her audience with a flourish. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, sweeping a hand toward him like she was presenting a circus act, "behold our janitor, excuse me, mechanic, who thinks he can succeed where MIT failed. This should be entertaining." A few executives smirked. One stifled a laugh. Another adjusted his tie, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Their silence was complicity, their indifference a mirror of the culture Victoria had built, ruthless, hierarchical, merciless. Jamal exhaled slowly, setting the trash bags aside. His pulse thundered in his ears, but his expression remained calm, unreadable. For years, he had been underestimated, dismissed, overlooked. Perhaps this moment was no different. Or perhaps, just perhaps, it was the moment he had been waiting for. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Silicon Valley skyline glittered, oblivious to the storm brewing inside Tech Vanguard's fortress. In that glass tower, reputations were currency and humiliation was a weapon. And now, in front of the company's most powerful stakeholders, Jamal Washington was being placed on trial, not just as a man, but as an idea. The bet had been made. The terms were clear. And as Jamal met Victoria Sterling's icy stare, something unspoken passed between them, a challenge, sharp and undeniable. The janitor had been underestimated. But the engine wasn't the only thing in that room ready to awaken. The 42nd floor of Tech Vanguard's headquarters was designed to intimidate. From the marble floors that gleamed like frozen lakes to the glass walls that opened into a commanding view of Silicon Valley, the building itself was Victoria Sterling's crown jewel. It wasn't just an office, it was a temple to her ambition, a fortress where her will was law. Victoria had earned her reputation as one of the most ruthless CEOs in America. To her investors, she was a visionary, a relentless force who had tripled the company's value in under a decade. To her employees, she was a storm in heels, brilliant, unpredictable, and merciless. Mistakes weren't corrected under her leadership, they were punished, carved into professional gravestones. Her empire was built on fear and precision. She ran Tech Vanguard like a military campaign, her boardroom the battlefield, her executives the soldiers, and her competitors the conquered. Every corner of the company carried her fingerprints, marketing slogans that bore her words, press releases that echoed her voice, contracts that sealed her will. And yet, for all her power, for all her brilliance, there was one thing she could not command, the machine at the center of her empire's next great leap. On the massive walnut table, guarded by two engineers in pressed suits, rested the heart of Tech Vanguard's ambitions, the prototype of the Pegasus engine. It wasn't just a machine, it was supposed to be the revolution. An AI-guided powertrain designed to fuel autonomous delivery drones and vehicles, the Pegasus engine was meant to launch Tech Vanguard into the stratosphere of global dominance. Contracts worth $67 million hung in the balance, each dependent on that engine's flawless performance. German investors had already wired half the funding, their expectations sky-high. If the project succeeded, Victoria would not just dominate Silicon Valley, she would write herself into history as the woman who transformed logistics forever. But the Pegasus engine had betrayed her. 67 test runs. 67 failures. Each time, the system would power up, roar to life for minutes, then collapse under a mysterious shutdown error. MIT engineers had flown in, Harvard think tanks had analyzed the code, Stanford PhDs had probed the circuits, and all had left empty-handed, baffled, their pride bruised. The problem wasn't just technical. It was political, financial, existential. Competitors were watching. Investors were whispering. And Victoria's pristine reputation, built on the myth that she could never lose, was cracking under the weight of silence. And then came Jamal Washington. No one in the room truly noticed him until Victoria pointed her manicured nail and turned him into the evening's entertainment. To the executives, he was a ghost in the machine, always there in the background, wiping down tables, fixing leaking vents, hauling trash, never speaking unless spoken to. His badge might have said technical consultant, but the truth was that he had been buried in the building's underclass, his title a relic of HR's paperwork, his potential suffocated under the company's hierarchy. Yet, what none of them understood was that Jamal had been listening. Watching. Every time those geniuses from MIT failed, every time the Pegasus engine coughed itself to death, Jamal had been in the room, sweeping up their discarded schematics, overhearing their arguments, noting the arrogance that blinded them. He knew the rhythm of that machine's hum, the slight tremor it gave before failure, the whisper of imbalance no software algorithm could hear. But Victoria didn't care about that. She didn't see knowledge in him. She saw a stage. She saw an opportunity to turn her failure into spectacle, to distract her board from the cracks forming under her throne. Mocking the janitor mechanic was just another performance, another way to remind her empire who ruled and who crawled. Yet in her hunger for humiliation, she had underestimated two things: the desperation of a man who had been silenced for too long, and the truth buried in the Pegasus engine's trembling core. As the German investors adjusted their ties and the board members whispered nervously about deadlines, Victoria smiled that thin, predatory smile. She believed she had already won. To her, Jamal's quiet presence was nothing but a temporary diversion, a forgettable footnote in her legend. But the world outside those glass walls was hungry for stories of justice, redemption, and reversal. And though Victoria Sterling didn't know it yet, she had just lit the fuse to a spectacle that would soon make headlines across continents. The Pegasus engine was no longer just a machine. It was the stage for a reckoning. And Jamal Washington, the man they dismissed as a cleaner, was about to step onto it. Long before Jamal Washington stood in Victoria Sterling's boardroom, he had stood in the shadows of another kind of empire, a modest garage in Oakland that smelled of motor oil, rubber, and resilience. The garage belonged to his grandfather, Raymond Washington, a man who had grown up fixing engines with his bare hands, his wisdom passed down not through books but through grease-stained experience. "Machines speak," Raymond used to say. "You just gotta be quiet enough to listen." Jamal listened. By the time he was 13, he could dismantle an engine block and reassemble it blindfolded. At 15, he was tuning cars in half the time of professional mechanics. At 17, he had earned a full scholarship to study mechanical engineering at a respected community college, his dreams as polished as the chrome under a hood. But dreams bend under the weight of reality. When his mother's health collapsed, medical bills stacked higher than textbooks. Jamal had to make a choice, pursue his degree or keep the lights on at home. He chose family. His scholarship slipped away, and with it, the clean path to his future. Still, he never stopped learning. Nights were spent poring over engineering manuals, watching MIT lectures on cracked laptop screens, running simulations on borrowed software. By day, he worked shifts in auto shops, gaining not just knowledge but instinct, and almost sixth sense for the rhythm of machines. He didn't just fix engines, he understood them, felt their moods, their whispers of imbalance. Years later, when he applied for a job at Tech Vanguard, he thought his break had come. His resume was filled with certifications, projects, and a list of repairs that would make any recruiter raise an eyebrow. He wasn't asking to lead, he just wanted a seat at the table. Instead, HR slotted him into a vague title, technical consultant, and assigned him menial tasks. Soon, his badge meant less than the mop he carried. He became the invisible man of the building, cleaning up after the engineers he should have been working alongside. His ideas, when shared, were brushed aside. His knowledge was ignored, not because of its lack of merit, but because of the skin he wore and the role they had already decided for him. Yet invisibility had its advantages. When MIT teams came, Jamal was there, sweeping floors while they argued over equations. When Harvard grads scribbled on whiteboards, he emptied their trash bins, catching glimpses of diagrams. When Stanford PhDs bickered over code, he wiped their tables, listening closer than anyone realized. And all the while, he kept watching the Pegasus engine. He saw the way it vibrated just before failure, a subtle tremor others missed. He heard the faint shift in its tone, a dissonance like an off-key piano. He noted that every shutdown happened not at random, but at the same harmonic cycle, a rhythm no algorithm had caught. To Jamal, it wasn't a mystery. It was a machine crying out, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. Still, he stayed silent. Because in Tech Vanguard, silence was safer than truth. Until Victoria Sterling dragged him into the spotlight. Now, as he stood in that gleaming boardroom, 20 pairs of eyes fixed on him, Jamal felt the weight of every invisible year pressing on his shoulders. They didn't see the long nights in the garage, the textbooks stained with coffee, the hands calloused from turning wrenches since childhood. They didn't see the man who had taught himself algorithms, circuitry, and AI integration out of sheer willpower. No, they only saw the janitor with trash bags in his hands. But Jamal knew something none of them did. He wasn't afraid of failure. He had already lived it, endured it, and risen past it. And when you've carried the weight of family, poverty, and invisibility, the sneers of executives mean very little. As Victoria mocked him, her words sharp as glass, Jamal's mind wasn't on her. It was on the Pegasus engine, humming in silence like a challenge only he could hear. He didn't need their approval. He didn't need their permission. He just needed a chance. And for the first time, the empire that ignored him had opened a door, even if it was only meant to be a stage for humiliation. Jamal wasn't planning to play their clown. He was planning to listen, to act, and to let the engine speak the truth they had all been too arrogant to hear. The mechanic they ignored was about to become the name they would never forget. The boardroom was no longer just a meeting space, it was an arena. Cameras glinted from the corners of the ceiling, streaming the spectacle to investors across 3 continents. Victoria Sterling had ordered the live stream moments earlier, her lips curved in a cruel smile as she instructed her assistant, "Let them all see how impossible this is. Nothing sells like humiliation." Jamal stood at the center of it all, his hands empty now, the trash bags left behind at the door like an old skin he no longer needed. The marble floor reflected his silhouette, tall and steady, though inside his chest his heart pounded like a war drum. He scanned the room. The executives, polished and precise, watched him with smirks curled behind their ties. Some leaned back in their chairs, eager to witness a comedy. Others whispered bets under their breath, the kind of gambling men made when they believed the outcome was already decided. And then there was the machine, the Pegasus engine. It sat on the conference table like a sleeping beast, wires coiled like veins, steel glistening under the artificial lights. Its beauty was undeniable, its promise revolutionary, and yet its silence mocked everyone who had failed to awaken it. To Jamal, it didn't look like an enemy. It looked like an old puzzle, waiting for the right hands. Victoria's voice cut through the hush, sharp as a blade. "Well," she demanded, tapping her heel against the marble. "Or are you going to stand there and stare at it until your shift ends?" A ripple of laughter spread across the room. Jamal didn't flinch. His voice, calm and measured, carried more weight than the jeers. "I'll need tools. And time." The executives laughed again, but Victoria waved a hand, indulging him like a queen offering scraps to a beggar. "Fine. Bring him what he wants. Let's see the miracle worker in action." Within minutes, a tray of tools was brought in, precision wrenches, calibration sensors, diagnostic tablets. Jamal ignored most of it. He picked up only what he needed, an old-fashioned wrench, a sonic calibrator, and a fiber optic light. The rest he pushed aside, his movements confident, unshaken. The German investors leaned forward on their screens, murmuring in clipped accents. "He seems calm," one noted. Calm wasn't the word for it. Focused. Certain. Determined. Jamal wasn't here to play Victoria's game. He was here to listen. He crouched beside the Pegasus engine, his callous fingers brushing the metal casing with a mechanic's reverence. The hum of its circuits echoed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. He tapped a sensor against its frame, listening to the subtle resonance. A faint vibration answered him, a tremor the others had missed. "There," he whispered to himself. One of the engineers scoffed. "He thinks it's that simple?" But Jamal didn't respond. He was already loosening a panel, sliding the light inside to examine the harmonic stabilizers. His brow furrowed. The engine's flaw wasn't in the code, as the MIT teams had insisted. It wasn't in the circuitry, as Harvard swore. It was mechanical, a harmonic imbalance in the rotor assembly. It was the kind of problem textbooks overlooked but any old garage mechanic would recognize in seconds. He set to work, adjusting the alignment, tightening where the vibration bled, installing a makeshift dampener with the kind of precision that came not from theory but from instinct. Each movement was clean, deliberate, the work of a man who had spent a lifetime in communion with machines. The room grew quieter. Even the executives stopped whispering. There was no fumbling in Jamal's hands, no hesitation in his motions. What they had dismissed as janitor's clumsiness was unfolding before them as mastery. Victoria crossed her arms, her smirk faltering. Minutes later, Jamal straightened. Sweat lined his forehead, but his eyes burned with quiet fire. He replaced the panel and stepped back. "It's ready," he said simply. The words fell heavy in the air. Victoria's lips curved again, though now the smile was tighter, thinner. "By all means," she purred. "Turn it on. Let's end this comedy." Jamal didn't touch the ignition. Instead, he gestured to Dr. Rodriguez, the lead systems analyst, who had been watching him more carefully than the others. "You start it," Jamal said. "You'll know if it's real." Rodriguez hesitated, then pressed the ignition key. The Pegasus engine shuddered, hummed, then roared to life. The boardroom vibrated with its power, lights flickering as the machine stabilized into a steady rhythm. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. The shutdown error never came. On the diagnostic tablet, green indicators bloomed one after another, systems syncing with flawless precision. Efficiency spiked beyond theoretical expectations, surpassing even the original design. The silence in the room turned to awe. Executives leaned forward, their faces pale. The German investors on screen erupted in shocked applause. And Victoria Sterling's smirk collapsed, her face frozen in disbelief as the impossible unfolded before her eyes. Jamal didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply crossed his arms and watched the machine, listening to its new rhythm, steady and strong. The challenge had been accepted. And Jamal Washington had just rewritten the rules of the empire that mocked him. The Pegasus engine didn't just start, it came alive. The boardroom trembled with its roar, a mechanical symphony reverberating through marble floors and glass walls. Its polished casing gleamed under the ceiling lights, vibrating not with chaos but with harmony. For 6 weeks, the company's brightest minds had failed to coax more than 14 minutes of life from the machine. Now it purred like a predator stretching after a long sleep. At first, the executives didn't move. Their disbelief was a kind of paralysis. The green diagnostic lights on the screen glowed one after another like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Pressure, optimal. Temperature, stable. Harmonic frequency, locked. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward, her eyes widening as data streamed across her monitor. 72 minutes continuous operation projected. No anomalies detected. The MIT engineers clustered near her, whispering in disbelief. "That's impossible, we tried every variable." "No," she corrected without looking away from the screen. "You tried every academic variable." He listened to the machine. Jamal stood with his arms folded, his callous hands resting against his coveralls. He didn't bask in the gasps or the murmurs. His focus remained on the hum of the engine, reading its rhythm the way his grandfather had once taught him to listen for the heartbeat of a car. This wasn't victory yet. This was proof of possibility. Victoria Sterling broke the silence, her voice sharp with desperation. "It's just a fluke. The error will show up any second now." But the seconds stretched into minutes. 15. 20. The fatal shutdown window passed, and still the Pegasus ran strong. From the giant windows, employees began to gather in the courtyard below, staring up as the rumble carried through the tower. The prototype delivery truck, Tech Vanguard's showpiece vehicle, sat dormant outside, waiting for power it hadn't tasted in 6 weeks. Jamal turned toward the glass. "Let's connect it." The room erupted in protest. "You can't risk. What if it fails? The investors are watching." But Dr. Rodriguez raised her hand. Authority silenced them. She nodded slowly, almost reverently. "Do it." Cables were attached, systems bridged. The Pegasus engine's energy surged into the truck, feeding dormant circuits. The dashboard lights flickered, then stabilized. GPS arrays lit up. Radar sensors rotated. The autonomous navigation AI awoke with mechanical precision. Outside, the truck's headlights blazed like eyes opening. Gasps rippled through the courtyard crowd. Then, movement. The truck reversed from its bay, pivoted, and executed a flawless 90-degree turn. It rolled forward, stopped at the painted crosswalk, then advanced again, sensors responding seamlessly to environmental cues. The boardroom pressed against the glass, executives abandoning composure as they watched the impossible unfold. The truck maneuvered around landscaping, parked between 2 company cars with surgical precision, then rolled back to its original position. 37 minutes. No shutdown. No error code. Nothing but flawless performance. Klaus Müller, the lead German investor, adjusted his glasses. His voice cracked with disbelief. "This is 97.3% efficiency. That exceeds the theoretical maximum. Another investor whispered, "We must secure him immediately." Rodriguez turned from the diagnostics, her gaze fixed on Jamal. There was no condescension, no pity, only respect. "In 40 years of engineering," she said, "I've never seen readings this clean. This isn't luck. This is mastery." The livestream numbers ticked higher, 50,000, 60, 70,000 viewers. Comments poured in across LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. "Who is this guy? A janitor solved what MIT couldn't. Hire him now. This is history in real time." Victoria's face paled. She was still recording, but her smirk had long since disappeared. On her own stream, the comments tore into her leadership. "How could you sideline this man? CEO or clown? Give Jamal the job already." For the first time in years, Victoria Sterling had no words. The boardroom fell into a charged silence as the engine powered down with a contented sigh, the truck completing its flawless circuit. Rodriguez stood, walking toward Jamal. She extended her hand. That was extraordinary engineering intuition. Elegant. Efficient. Brilliant. Jamal shook it, his grip steady but humble. "Machines don't lie," he said quietly. "You just have to listen." Behind them, Klaus Muller cleared his throat. "On behalf of our delegation, I will state it plainly. Her Washington's methods impressed us beyond expectation. Our partnership terms will increase by 20%, contingent on his leadership in engine development." The board erupted in murmurs, the weight of $20 million additional dollars crashing into their calculations. Executives who had smirked at Jamal minutes earlier now leaned forward, eager to attach themselves to his rising star. But Jamal didn't glance at them. His gaze rested on the Pegasus, now still, but alive in a way it had never been before. This wasn't just an engine. It was vindication. And it was only the beginning. The Pegasus engine's hum still lingered in the walls, but the silence in the boardroom was louder than thunder. For 6 weeks, the brightest engineers in Silicon Valley had failed. For 2 hours, a man they dismissed as maintenance staff had succeeded. The room was no longer an arena of mockery, it was a courtroom. And Victoria Sterling was on trial. The German investors conferred in urgent whispers, their accents sharp, clipped, carrying weight heavier than millions in contracts. Klaus Muller's assistant typed furiously on her tablet, documenting every metric, every second of the live stream. Numbers didn't lie. Neither did 50,000 online witnesses. Victoria tried to regain her posture, but her polished mask was cracking. The diamond bracelet she once flaunted now felt like chains around her wrist. She stepped forward, forcing a smile that looked brittle under the fluorescent lights. "Well," she said, her voice wavering, "a lucky fix is still a fix. Good for him. But let's not exaggerate. Enough." The single word came from Dr. Elena Rodriguez, sharp and absolute. Her fountain pen clicked shut with finality. "This wasn't luck, Ms. Sterling. This was engineering brilliance. Something your arrogance blinded you from seeing." The words sliced through the room like glass. Board member Patricia Brooks, silent until now, adjusted her glasses and spoke with the calm authority of someone whose portfolio could move markets. "This incident will require a governance review. We cannot overlook the fact that an employee with demonstrable expertise was relegated to janitorial duties while we hemorrhaged 6 weeks and nearly $70 million. Victoria's smile faltered entirely. "You can't be serious." But Klaus Muller cut her off. "We are quite serious. Today, her Washington achieved what 3 Ivy League teams could not. If this is how Tech Vanguard allocates talent, we have concerns about leadership judgment." Concerns. The word dropped like a hammer. Investors didn't use it lightly. Concerns meant risk, instability, potential withdrawal. And every executive in the room knew what it meant for stock value. The live stream chat confirmed it. "Fire her. Hire him. This CEO just got schooled by her janitor. #Engineering Justice. Victoria's phone buzzed violently in her hand, notification after notification. She glanced down. Her own PR team had texted in panic. Headlines were already forming. Janitor outsmarts CEO's Ivy League army. Tech Vanguard's leadership humiliation goes viral. Her stomach turned. Meanwhile, Jamal stood quietly at the edge of the table, the calm eye in the storm. He hadn't asked for revenge, hadn't demanded recognition. He just wanted the machine fixed. But now, the machine had become a mirror reflecting the company's rot. Dr. Rodriguez turned to him. "Mr. Washington, I am bypassing normal promotion procedures. Effective immediately, I am recommending you to the board as Senior Diagnostics Engineer. Your compensation will reflect market value, and your leadership will guide our harmonic development program." The executives gasped. That wasn't a promotion, that was a rocket launch. Before Victoria could object, Klaus Muller nodded. "Our delegation concurs. Furthermore, our increased investment, 20% above previous terms, is contingent upon Mr. Washington's leadership in our European program." The room buzzed. $20 million more. Global expansion. All tied to Jamal. Marcus Brooks, the MIT team leader, stepped forward, his face flushed with humility. "Mr. Washington," he said, "on behalf of our team, I apologize for dismissing your insights. We request collaboration moving forward. We'd be honored to learn from your diagnostic methods." The transformation was undeniable. 2 hours earlier, Jamal had been invisible. Now, he was the future. And Victoria Sterling, the woman who built an empire on intimidation, was unraveling. Her phone slipped from her trembling hands, clattering onto the marble. The live stream was still running. Tens of thousands of viewers had just witnessed her downfall in real time. Patricia Brooks's voice cut the air. "This company will initiate an investigation into discriminatory practices, including your handling of Mr. Washington. Your leadership will be under review, effective immediately." Victoria's face drained of color. "You can't." Klaus Muller's voice was colder than steel. "We can. And we must. Our partnership requires confidence, not arrogance. Today, your arrogance nearly cost us everything." The words hung heavy in the air. Jamal didn't gloat. He didn't even look at Victoria. His eyes stayed on the Pegasus, now silent but alive, the machine that had given him not only vindication but a voice. The reckoning had begun. And the empire that mocked him was now forced to kneel before his undeniable brilliance. 3 weeks later, the Tech Vanguard headquarters no longer felt like the marble palace where Jamal once walked in as invisible. It now hummed with a new energy, one he had unknowingly sparked the day he rolled up his sleeves and touched the Pegasus. The lobby wall bore a fresh inscription, etched in steel letters. "Innovation has no uniform." Employees paused to read it each morning, some nodding with pride, others reflecting in silence. It wasn't just a motto, it was a reminder. A reminder of the day the world watched a man in oil-stained coveralls outthink an entire army of Ivy League engineers and their untouchable CEO. Inside the top-floor glass conference room, Jamal adjusted the lapels of his new tailored blazer. It felt strange at first. He had spent years in worn work shirts, but now the fabric carried a weight, not of vanity, but of responsibility. The nameplate on the door no longer read custodial staff. It read, Jamal Washington, Senior Diagnostics Engineer, Harmonic Division Lead. And today was his first official briefing. As the team gathered, including Marcus Brooks and 2 other engineers who once scoffed at him, Jamal stood at the head of the table. Marcus gave a small, genuine smile. "You ready, boss?" Jamal chuckled softly. Still getting used to that word. "But yeah, let's do this." The screen behind him lit up with schematics of the Pegasus next-generation design, refinements inspired by his improvisation. Ideas flowed freely now, every team member hungry to learn, to collaborate. The arrogance that once suffocated the room had been replaced with curiosity. This wasn't just engineering. This was transformation. Across the city, however, Victoria Sterling was living in a different kind of reality. The Sterling Tower penthouse, once filled with champagne parties and magazine photo shoots, was now a cage of silence. The board had suspended her pending investigation. Shareholders pulled endorsements. The media dissected her every quote, replaying the viral clip where she mocked Jamal, "Fix this engine and I'll marry you." It had become the internet's punchline, the meme that refused to die. Her attorneys advised silence. But silence was louder than her words ever were. The world wasn't laughing with her anymore. They were laughing at her. Meanwhile, Jamal's story had gone global. Engineering forums, social media feeds, even evening news anchors celebrated him as the mechanic who fixed the future. Schools requested his presence for STEM talks. Documentaries requested interviews. His humility, his refusal to gloat, became part of the legend. At the next quarterly meeting, Klaus Muller flew in again. This time, he didn't walk past Jamal. He shook his hand firmly in front of the entire company. "Herr Washington," he said with his heavy accent, "your name carries weight now. Not just here, but across Europe. We want your leadership as we expand the Pegasus program." Applause filled the room. Jamal nodded, steady as ever. "I'll do it the only way I know how, team first. Machine second. Ego never." The words landed like scripture. Even Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who had championed him, leaned back with a rare smile. This company just remembered what innovation actually looks like. The transformation wasn't just Jamal's. It was Tech Vanguard's. The entire corporate culture began shifting, mentorship programs, bias audits, recruitment pipelines designed to look beyond polished resumes and ivy-coated walls. Jamal's story wasn't a headline anymore. It was a blueprint. Late one evening, Jamal returned to the now quiet lab. The Pegasus sat in its chamber, dormant but alive, the hum of possibilities still vibrating faintly through its coils. He placed his hand on the polished steel casing, the same way he had the day it all changed. Back then, it was just him and the machine against a room full of doubters. Now, it was him and a company ready to believe again. He exhaled slowly, not with relief but with gratitude. The world had tried to define him by his coveralls. Victoria Sterling had mocked him as if grease under fingernails meant grease in the mind. But the truth was undeniable: brilliance wears no uniform. As Jamal turned to leave, the city skyline stretched before him, glowing with neon and possibility. He didn't walk with revenge in his heart, only resolve. Resolve to keep proving that genius could rise from anywhere, even from a mechanic's toolbox. And somewhere in the silence of her penthouse, Victoria Sterling watched the news coverage of his latest triumph. For the first time in her career, she wasn't the headline. She was the footnote. Jamal Washington was the story now. The mechanic who fixed more than just an engine. He had fixed a company. He had fixed the narrative. And, in a way, he had fixed the future.